Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Jeremy Scahill, of course, the independent investigative journalist, frequent contributor to The Nation magazine, Puffin Writing Fellow at the Nation Institute, author of the internationally best-selling book Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army, and writing and blogging and all sorts of cool stuff over at rebelreports.com. Jeremy, this former CIA agent says, what the agency was doing with Blackwater scares the hell out of me. There's two things I wanted to talk with you about. One is just this whole situation of a mercenary army and what's going on, and just lay that out. And the second is the state of reporting on that in the United States today. Which would you like to take first?
Well, we can go in order. I mean, with the first question that you asked there. Look, the story here about Blackwater continues even under President Obama. The reality is that what we now understand is that not only is Blackwater still working overtly in Iraq and Afghanistan, but its presence inside of Afghanistan also includes continued work on the covert CIA assassination program. Now, just as by way of a bit of background here, Thom, as I reported in my book on Blackwater, beginning in 2002, the company, Blackwater, was hired by the Central Intelligence Agency to be involved with U.S. covert operations inside of Afghanistan and Pakistan. That contract was set up by a man named Alvin Buzzy Krongard, who was the number 3 man at the CIA. He would then go on to take up a paid position on Blackwater's board of directors. He was the first in what would be a line of senior CIA people from the Bush era to jump over to Blackwater. Blackwater was sort of the tip of the spear of the radical Bush privatization agenda when it came to the war machine, to the point where when Bush left office, you had a 1-to-1 ratio with so-called private contractors and soldiers on the battlefield.
Right.
In short, Thom, you had Blackwater working at every level of the overt and covert U.S. war machine, to the point where Representative Jan Schakowsky actually told me that it was clear that Bush and Cheney trusted Eric Prince, the owner of Blackwater, more than the U.S. Congress, because he was privy to information that was systematically withheld from the Congress. So radical privatization agenda really gone wild, with Blackwater as the tip of the spear.
Yeah, and Prince, from Buzzy Krongard to Cofer Black to Edgar Prince and now Eric Prince. And Eric Prince, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong on this, has recently also said that part of his personal mission, and perhaps part of the Blackwater corporate mission, fill this in for me, is to destroy Islam?
Right. I mean, you have two former Blackwater employees submitting sworn affidavits in a civil case against Blackwater. They also say that they have given this information in front of the federal grand jury that's been convened to investigate Blackwater. These two former employees allege that Eric Prince views himself as a Christian crusader tasked with eliminating Muslims and fighting Islam globally. They also charge that his men in Iraq were essentially on orders to kill Iraqis at will. They also allege that Eric Prince himself, or perhaps his associates on his orders, may have murdered individuals who were planning on cooperating with the federal government's investigation into Blackwater's operations, including potential weapons smuggling, the involvement of child prostitutes at Blackwater's compound in Iraq, and potentially also Eric Prince benefiting off of illicit weapons sales. These are very, very serious allegations, and to me, the key question here, among many, is why on earth is the U.S. government continuing to do business with this company? If you had a construction company working on a U.S. government contract that was alleged to have been involved with all of these things, who had its employees pleading guilty to manslaughter allegations, that was being investigated by the IRS, you probably wouldn't keep giving them hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts.
Well, the fundamental difference, we're talking with Jeremy Scahill, rebelreports.com, his website. The fundamental difference is that if it was, for example, a corrupt contractor in New Jersey that was, putting toxic waste into the asphalt that they were putting on the roads and was kicking back to politicians and was all mobbed up, they might actually, in many cases over the years, they would maintain those contracts by knowing where the bodies were buried. I mean, could it be that Blackwater knows enough about what's going on inside the federal government, and particularly what's going on inside the military-industrial complex, that they've intimidated our own government?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point that you raise. I mean, another dimension to this, or another way of looking at this, is that Blackwater provided a very essential service to the Bush administration, and that was that they already took a very covert, secret plan, and they removed it even a step further from any form of accountability. I wouldn't be surprised if what we heard was that Eric Prince actually said to the CIA or to the vice president, look, we don't have to take any money to be involved with this assassination program. Don't bother with paperwork. We'll just do it because we're so rich we don't even need your money. We just want to participate in this crusade. I mean, the fact that these guys also were involved with this kind of a sensitive program that obviously has continued to some extent under President Obama would lead me to believe that the point you're raising is actually a legitimate point of inquiry for the Congress to take up. What does Blackwater know that may, in fact, be allowing its relationship with the federal government to continue? It's an interesting point, Thom.
In 1976, I believe, Gerald Ford signed an executive order barring the CIA from assassinating people. Right. Is that, A, the case, B, still in effect, and C, if so, might that be why the federal government is outsourcing assassinations to a private contractor?
Well, I mean, the short answer is yes. It could be why they're outsourcing assassinations to a private contractor, but people that I've talked to who served for their entire career in the CIA say that for the entire existence of that organization, they've used the process of presidential findings, also known as lethal findings, to circumvent that ban on assassinations. President Clinton, for example, signed a couple of lethal findings authorizing the assassination of al-Qaeda leaders. President Bush, of course, signed several of those as well. You know, I think Noam Chomsky has been very good in pointing out that it's not just a matter of looking at the legality or illegality or constitutionality of these operations, but looking at the overall morality and the overall sense of justice, although the strongest argument to make is that these would fall outside of the bounds of U.S. law, and I think that's part of the story with the broader picture. I have to say, Thom, I was talking to Ralph Nader the other day, and your name came up because I was asking Ralph about this idea of Blackwater arguing in court cases that they should have human rights, and that the corporation itself is like an employee of the federal government, and therefore the federal government is liable for the company's crimes. And Ralph Nader brought up your work on the subject of corporate personhood. What we have here is a company that's been involved with some of the worst brutality on the U.S. government payroll abroad that now is trying to push the liability for these actions onto the backs of U.S. taxpayers in the form of the defense they're presenting at these lawsuits against them.
Right, by claiming corporate personhood. And my book on that topic, and thanks for the plug, is called Unequal Protection, The Rise of Corporate Dominance and the Theft of Human Rights. We're talking with Jeremy Scahill. He's the author of Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army, his website, rebelreports.com. Jeremy, just to close this out, and if you can stick over the break, then we can get into the state of media in the United States. Is that all right with you?
Sure.
Okay, great, because we got about a minute and a half or so here before we've got to take a break. But this investigation into we now learned 100 people have died in the custody of either the CIA or private mercenary armies during so-called interrogations, torture sessions. At least 100 people that we know of. All of these investigations. Do you think that we might see an Archibald Cox kind of phenomena where Cox came in as the second investigator in the Whitewater case, or Watergate case rather, and with a fairly narrowly circumscribed mandate, and then discovered that there were these tapes in the White House, and all of a sudden, boom, the thing jumped to being all about Nixon?
Well, I think that what we are going to see here is that Vice President Dick Cheney was micromanaging all aspects of the U.S. torture program, the extraordinary rendition program, and the expanding use of private contractors. Let's remember, Thom, that from almost day one at Guantanamo, you had the presence of private contractors who were being used in the interrogation. At Abu Ghraib, which was the subject of Gitmoization when they exported U.S. torture policies abroad, you had contractors from Titan and Khaki and other corporations deeply involved with all aspects of the interrogation and the torture. So I think that one of the great Pandora's boxes that could be opened by this is the fact that you had the overwhelming presence of contractors being directed by U.S. government personnel to engage in conduct that was illegal. I'm all for going after the foot soldiers if they committed violations of U.S. law, but if you do that at the expense of going after the powerful who set the tone and gave the orders, then you're really doing nothing to preserve any sense of integrity going forward in this country or to preserve any sense of justice or accountability.
Yeah, the law or the Constitution. And you wonder also, since George W. Bush, for his father's campaign, his job was to bring in the evangelical Christian vote, and he burrowed himself very, very thoroughly back in that campaign into the evangelical Christian community. If that was when he and Eric Prince might have hooked up, and there might even be an element of that in this. I don't know. But up next...
Prince interned in his father's White House.
Yes. Up next, why did Chuck Todd say that Jeremy sullied his reputation, and why does that matter to all news and reporting? Stick around. Jeremy Scahill here with us. We'll be right back.